We open up to Kalamis and another Galactic Patrol member on a neighboring moon as Goku suddenly appeared following his instant transmission away from Jaco's location. Goku previously taunted Gas in regards to his inability to keep up with his inferior version of the technique, and so here we would have Gas continuing to give chase. And upon his appearance, Gas would suddenly land a kick to the side of Goku that was certainly rather damaging. He would furthermore follow up with a series of successive hits before yet again, Goku would teleport elsewhere, which Gas would follow. And by way of instant transmission, Goku has been locking onto different people he has met over the course of the series and essentially been using them as pit stops across the universe, which would then bring us to the location of the referee from the Universe 6 vs Universe 7 tournament. They would exchange blows here quickly before going elsewhere to the location of even more Galactic Patrol members. Goku's leg would clash with Gas's, and yet again, the two would go elsewhere. This time, Gas would make it clear that Goku could not escape him. But while he outcried like this, Goku would point to the side of his opponent, as suddenly, a whole heap of rubbish would be dumped onto him. As here we would have Monaca in the driver's seat, who, if you recall, was fabricated to be the hero of his homeworld and the strongest mortal fighter Lord Beerus had ever faced. In reality, he was just a simple delivery man. And Goku would then say that this was Gas's punishment for warping so recklessly. Gas would begin to rise from the muck, and Goku would urge him to clean himself off in the nearby river before they continued their bout, but Gas was furious and would tell Goku to be silent as the two would again find themselves elsewhere, this time at Galactic Patrol headquarters, landing Gas in the bathtub of the Galactic King, much to Goku's delight and Gas's frustration. Now back on the planet Serial, Minato was still trying his best to aid Granola, who had been super violated by the heaters previously, having been blinded and shot through the abdomen. Alek at this point would wonder where Goku and Gas had gone, as Vegeta would recognize that Goku was buying them all some time. Alek would immediately have Oil lock onto Gas's position by way of the tracker and his communications device, from which point we would have Goku and Gas going at it inside of Galactic Prison. And very obviously, Gas was really frustrated by Goku's constant teleportation. And you know, the more we see from Gas, the more he reveals himself to be both exceedingly gullible and rather juvenile. Goku would bait Gas once more with the declaration that he is better at instant transmission than Gas is, which would surely get on the guy's nerves. However, his sudden presence here would immediately catch the attention of several inmates, just like you should pay attention to the like and subscribe buttons. Zhao Yogi and Yunba in particular, as former members of the Galactic Bandit Brigade, would recognize Gas to be the kid brother of the Heaters despite his now far more imposing stature, from which point Zhao Yogi would propose that Gas free them as they all bear resentment towards Goku. Gas would look to them for a moment, recognizing them to have once been the henchmen of the late Saganbo, and let it be known that he did not care for their aid in the slightest. Now this would really piss Zhao Yogi off, and furthermore prompt Yunba to recall their first meeting, where Gas was apparently so scared that he wet himself. Gas would then pause for a bit before denying such claims, as Goku kinda just awkwardly stood there. I mean, imagine being in a life or death situation with an absurdly powerful opponent, arguably your toughest challenge yet, and you find out they peed on themselves in fear of a couple of nobodies. But Yunba would double down on this exposure and furthermore add that Gas was pleading with his brother to protect him because he was so scared. And at this point, Goku would simply question if it was true. And oh man, Gas was really pissed off at this point, saying that there was no urination involved. But considering the wet stain on his pants, Yunba had to question if this was how his species cried. From which point Gas would suddenly exclaim in frustration that he did not wet himself, that it was only a few drops because he had been holding it in for so long. And from this, everyone was at a loss for words before Goku would confirm that, wow, yeah, Gas really did wet himself. Now at the same time, Oil was still attempting to get a read on Gas's location, and finally did manage to pinpoint him to be in the Galactic Prison, before in an instant being even further away, much to Alek's dismay. Now as they landed in a brand new location, Goku would question if Gas just does everything his older brother says. Goku was really fishing for an alternative resolution to all this, as he expressed that Gas is now far stronger than his brother and could make his own decisions at this point. However, Gas would retort that he only ever aspires for power for the sake of Alek and Alek alone, that by following his orders, the Heaters would in time become the supreme organization in the universe. Gas would fire off 2 ki blasts in Goku's direction as Goku would teleport behind Gas, confirming that Gas must really respect his brother. Gas would admit that he was previously the weakest among them, but Alek raised him to be this level of power, and he would do anything for him. And considering how strong Gas was 40 years ago during the time of BARDOCK, it looks like Gas was the weakest a very long time ago. These alien species in Dragon Ball are especially long-lived for sure. and the more we see, the more Earth seems to be incredibly primitive. So yeah, Goss considered the will of elect to be absolute. But you know what? Goku's response to this would be pretty interesting. He'd question how sure Goss was about that, and also how far that trust extended, so he's trying to sow in those seeds of doubt. Not only that, but most notably, he would address the subject of his own brother, Raditz, who had attempted to kill him a while back, stating that Granola might just want to watch his own back. With Raditz largely being a forgotten character at this point, mentions and or inclusions like these are really interesting, especially coming from Goku, and I'm curious if you guys foresee any sort of Raditz return in the future. I mean, really, the veil between life and death in this series is especially thin, so who's to say that Uncle Raditz does not deserve a do-over? But now that the Heaters knew of their not-so-little brother's location, Elec would propose that with their adversaries all being half dead already, that they should exterminate the survivors before proceeding, a prospect which certainly excited the likes of Oil and Maki. Now, on a nearby asteroid, Goku and Goss would beam struggle against one another, a back and forth that would see Goss as the victor, with Goku teleporting away just in time as Goss left behind a crater with his attack. Goku was now suddenly on a galactic patrol ship where Iriko would be surprised to see him, as he was physically struggling at this point, with his hands being pretty wrecked on account of his constant defensive front against the overpowering Goss. And I am a big fan of how they've gone on to incorporate the advances made by way of the previous arcs in regards to this one, even if minor. I feel like the sagas in Z stood to be far more isolated than this. But anyways, Goku would suddenly notice something. Just as Goss made it, Goku was already off to the next location before he could even land a hit, which would bring us a leisurely Whis on some random planet. Here, he along with the Oracle Fish looked to be enjoying some sort of ice cream-like consumable, as both Goss and Goku would find themselves atop massive alien creatures. And boy was Goku glad to see Whis, as he was certainly lucky the guy happened to be on this random planet. But Whis would have to question Goku's intentions with this, as Goss would question who Whis was, as Goku would give him the simplified rundown, that Whis is his master and an angel. From there, Goku would apologize in advance to Whis and ask if he could leave Goss to him for a moment, making his escape before any confirmation, much to the shock of both these characters. And with that, Goku would backtrack from previous location to previous location in quick succession, while Goss, unable to get a read on Goku's location, was in complete and utter disbelief. And then finally, Goku would make it back to the planet Cereal, just as Maki and Oil prepared to attack Minato. And man oh man would Goku give them a mean look when he got back. I mean, he really pulled up on them, and for the moment it was a pretty good bluff, as it made it seem as though Goku had somehow triumphed over Goss, when in reality, he had simply outsmarted the guy in an extreme game of intergalactic tag. But the fight was not over just yet, because of course Whis as an angel cannot truly contest against mortals physically, and so it wasn't as if he was going to hold Goss back by way of combat. And in fact, he would not hold the guy back at all, as while Goss questioned Goku's whereabouts, Whis would let him know that Goku was back on the planet Cereal, which was a distance too great for Goss to warp to directly. He didn't have to relinquish this information at all, but he is a neutral being, so he did. To this, Goss would request the direction of the planet Cereal, and Whis would oblige without issue. And just like that, full of frustration and rage on account of being played for a fool, Goss would blast off into space, racing back to the origin point of this whole debacle. Goss may be childish, but Goku is even more so. Whis would then wonder why Goss could not have stuck around for a more calming experience, considering how great the desserts of this planet happened to be, a sentiment he would convey to the Oracle Fish. However, the Oracle Fish would question who exactly that person was, which at first may not seem all too significant considering they had never met before, and it's not as if Goss is even aware of what things like angels even are. But listen, the Oracle Fish foresaw the ascension of the strongest in the universe. Now, considering Granola so suddenly shot up to the top of the charts on account of the Dragon Balls, we initially presumed this declaration to merely allude to his rise in power, especially considering how they lined up narratively. But lo and behold, Goss has done the very same and gone even further beyond that, placing him at the top of the charts. And now, further considering the nature of Granola's wish and the circumstance around that, it is highly improbable that he will truly grow stronger beyond what we have seen of him growing into his provided power. So if the Oracle Fish places no significance on Goss's existence whatsoever in this regard, then certainly he is not the figure depicted by the prophecy. Therefore, most likely leaving us with either Goku or Vegeta as prospects, and considering how Vegeta continues to be disrespected even throughout this arc, I won't hold my breath. Not to mention, things continue to get even crazier for Goku as the chapter goes on. But now back to the planet Cereal, Goku would come to the aid of Granola and the others, attempting to make their way to safety just as a vehicle would suddenly make its way towards them all. It was Oatmeal, Granola's artificial intelligence partner in the form of a robot, and it already had Vegeta in the back backseat. And seeing this escape would cause Maki to become frantic, even going as far as to question if they should unleash their inner natures like Goss had for the sake of continuing the fight, which is to say that this seems to be an inherent trait of their species as opposed to being exclusive to Goss. However, Alec would immediately deny such a proposition, as the two of them would never beat Son Goku, their only proper course of action being to simply wait for Goss to make his return, as Oil would be left to keep an eye on them in the meanwhile. Now, as this group drove on elsewhere, the voice of Whis would suddenly be heard by way of a communication device that he had managed to stash on Goku's person during their ever so recent encounter, all without Goku ever noticing. Whis was not a fan of Goku interrupting his dessert time, but would warn him that Goss was in fact making his way back at incredible speeds, which Goku was surprised by, but like Goss had previously established, his people do not need to breathe. Whis would furthermore provide an approximation of 20 minutes until Goss made his way back, and hearing this would certainly be cause for concern for Minato, as 20 minutes was not nearly enough time for him to heal Granola. Beyond this though, Whis would inquire as to how Goku's training had been thus far, as Goku would admit that he was still having some trouble. He simply could not keep his heart calm like Whis could, which as far as Whis was concerned, made sense, as by being an angel, he was fundamentally different from Goku as a Saiyan. Goku would question what he could do to alleviate this issue, and Whis would repeat a previous sentiment, that it's up to Goku to uncover his own version of Ultra Instinct that was unique to him. He would then be told to listen to the voice from within himself and to question what he really is deep down, which confused Goku, but he wouldn't exactly have the time to go back and forth here, as Minato would suddenly call out to him as the son of Bardock and express that there is something he should show him now that they have made it back to his abode. Goku and Vegeta would lay Granola down as Minato would return with something for Goku, which would be uncovered to be a damaged scouter. A scouter left behind by Bardock, which Minato would now give to Goku. And with that, Goku held the scouter in his hands, somewhat nervously and in awe. But of course they were working on limited time right now, and so Vegeta would request to see it for a moment, and after a bit of tinkering, surmised that the thing was broken. However, he would notice traces of audio files on it. Files which, despite having the thing for 40 years, Minato was never able to get the thing to play. And more specifically, on it were audio recordings of Bardock's fight against Goss, which should in theory give them an idea of how exactly Bardock managed to win their battle. That being said, Goss was most definitely far weaker than he is right now, so this plan of theirs, at least within the realm of this particular story, may not be all too clever. It's like trying to apply how future Trunks took down Mecha Frieza to a plot against Golden Frieza, but whatever. Vegeta would note that Bulma could repair it, but of course they were a long way from home, which would prompt Oatmeal to step in, claiming to be able to directly access the audio by way of the device's circuitry, something they would only have so much time available for, as Goss was making his way back at breakneck speeds. I mean, we are talking faster than a spaceship. But yeah, Oatmeal would continue to tinker with the thing until it finally booted back up. The audio would then begin to play. It was Bardock's voice. He would explain that his attack had to have some effect. He would then urge Minato to take the opportunity to get as far away as he could. He would offer to slow Goss down, then saying that the two of them, Minato and Granola, have to stay alive. And it is this particular statement that would invoke a change in Goku. The words, "stay alive," they rang through his head until finally, after decades both in canon and as a franchise, Goku would remember. Goku would remember his parents sending him off-world. He would remember them urging him to stay alive. And this recognition would spark a very major change in Goku, which we will certainly go into depth with in a whole video of its own, considering just how substantial this happens to be. But things are not over just yet, as we would be taken back 40 years as Bardock faced Goss in protection of Granola and Minato. Here we would have a battle-damaged Bardock charging up a fist against his opponent who, let me just say, looks a whole lot less threatening at this point in time. He looks like an alien combination of Stewie Griffin and Riley Freeman. Definitely a menace to society, no doubt, but a far cry from the presence he later becomes. But anyways, Bardock would punch this unmoving kid in the face as if he were a Cabbage Patch doll and ground him. Goss would skid back and discern that his opponent was a Saiyan on account of his tail. He would also come to the conclusion that Bardock was actually rather powerful, despite them previously believing the planet to have been invaded by only low-class foot soldiers. But as opposed to his son's situation in the present, Bardock would have Goss entirely on the defensive. Goss would create some distance between the two before reeling back and chucking a ball of destructive energy, which would swiftly be knocked away by Bardock and followed up by a stomach-caving fist to the gut, then continued by a nasty kick to send him elsewhere. And this is where the audio recording began, as Bardock would express that attack had to have had some effect. furthermore telling Minato to get out of Dodge and for the two of them to stay alive. Now, if you recall, Minato did express that when Bardock defeated Gas, he was unconscious, so for the sake of this complete story, we will have to get to that at some point during this flashback. Gas will also need to unleash his true nature over the course of this bout, as Maki described such a thing going poorly in the past, and we got to see a glimpse of that as well. That being said, at the time, Gas did not yet possess the sealing accessory he and his siblings all eventually come to wear. And interestingly enough, 40 years ago, he was the only one without one, perhaps on account of their age difference. And not to mention, Bardock will also need to have his scouter be damaged and passed on to Minato as well. And speaking of, Bardock's scouter would suddenly go off like crazy as Gas would reemerge, letting the Saiyan know that escape was not an option for him. And boy was Bardock wrong about that last attack having effect, as unbelievably, despite Bardock's best efforts, this little monster did not even have a scratch on him. And Gas was ready to get serious at this point, as he refused to disappoint and lose Elect's faith in him, as he was ordered to handle this problem without delay. I am, and I'm sure you are, very excited to see what is up with Goku, but the next chapter is most definitely going to be a whole lot of Bardock action. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.